All right, so imagine a ruler so notorious, so captivating, that even death just wasn't enough.
Someone history just couldn't let go of.
Exactly. We're talking about Nero.
The Roman emperor.
Yep, but not just Nero himself. This time we're going even deeper. We're diving into the legend of Nero Redivivus.
The persistent belief that he would, return, come back from the grave.
After his death in 68 AD, we've got excerpts from Roman historians, whispers of imposters, and even some prophecies foretelling his grand comeback. It's a lot.
Definitely.
Our mission today is to unpack why this belief, this hope in some cases, that Nero would return, took root. What does it tell us about power, fear?
Maybe even a bit of Roman nostalgia.
Right. So to get us started, can you paint a picture of Nero for us? Who was he and why was he such a controversial figure, even before we get to the whole coming back from the dead thing?
Well, Nero's one of those figures who really embodies the contradictions of ancient Rome. I mean, here's an emperor obsessed with the arts.
Poetry,
Music, theater.
chariot races.
He even competed in those.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that.
But then on the other hand, his reign was definitely marked by some, brutality, not to mention extravagant spending.
And of course, we can't forget about the Great Fire of Rome.
Definitely a defining moment.
Absolutely. That fire really solidified his reputation, didn't it? And yet, here's what gets me. After his death, it wasn't just one person claiming to be Nero back from the dead.
Oh, you mean the imposters?
Yes, not one, not two, but 3 different individuals claiming to be Nero. What does that tell us about what was going on in Rome back then?
It really highlights how unstable things were politically.
This was the year of the 4 emperors, right?
Exactly. Chaos, tons of uncertainty, a real power vacuum just ripe for the taking.
The perfect recipe for imposters.
It almost feels comical, to think they thought they could pull it off.
I mean, one of them even tried to copy Nero's lyre playing.
It's almost hard to believe.
Were these guys just opportunistic con men, or were they tapping into some genuine desire, some longing for Nero to return? I think it's probably a little of both. Some were likely just in it for the power grab. But the fact that they even existed, that says something pretty profound about how the Romans thought at the time. Even with Nero being a tyrant, there was this sense of order, of stability that came with his rule.
And when that was gone?
Well, in the chaos that followed, people might have really yearned for a return to the familiar, even if that familiar was, a little bit tyrannical.
So these imposters eventually fade. But the idea of Nero coming back, that's what really sticks.
Oh, absolutely. The legend of Nero Redivivus really became this core part of Roman thought.
Like it permeated their society.
Exactly. And there's this really interesting text, the Sibylline Oracles. It's basically this collection of prophecies that Romans would consult. And one of them predicted that Nero would escape to Parthia and then eventually return with an army to, destroy Rome.
But he wasn't always seen as a destroyer, right? Depending on who you asked, he could be a destroyer or a savior. Some sources make him out to be this apocalyptic figure, while others thought he'd be the one to restore order. Why would anyone want a tyrant back in charge?
Because sometimes a tyrant can be seen as representing stability. If you imagine living in that period, constant upheaval, uncertainty about the future.
Scary.
Yeah. And against that backdrop, a figure like Nero could actually look like a beacon of hope.
Someone who could bring back the good old days, even if those days weren't all that good.
Exactly.
And this whole belief wasn't just some fringe idea either, right?
Yeah.
Even big names like Dio Chrysostom and Augustine of Hippo wrote about how everyone thought Nero was still out there somewhere.
Absolutely. Decades after his death, the fear or hope, depending on who you were, it just lingered. It's pretty remarkable.
It really shows how much this legend had sunk its teeth into Roman culture.
It really does.
And the legend doesn't stop there, does it? It weaves its way into early Christianity, too.
It does. This is where it gets even more interesting. Nero, who is this tyrannical emperor, gets transformed into this symbol of ultimate evil, almost a model for the Antichrist.
That's a big shift.
It is, and some scholars even think there are connections to the Book of Revelation.
Really?
Yeah, they interpret some of the passages as references to the whole Nero Redivivus legend.
So we have this controversial emperor who dies dramatically. Imposters pop up, feeding into a legend of his survival and eventual return, and then the whole thing becomes intertwined with early Christian beliefs. It's like Nero's ghost just refused to stay buried.
It really is.
Both figuratively and literally.
What's so fascinating about this whole thing is how Nero, even in death, became this blank canvas for people to project their anxieties, their hopes, and fears onto.
It makes you think, what does it say about a society that longs for the return of a tyrant, even one as notorious as Nero?
And how do these long-lasting myths, these stories we tell ourselves about the past, shape how we understand history and power? Something to consider, isn't it?
Definitely gives us a lot to think about.